Mr. Rivera.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you for having this important hearing. I know we like to refer often to the Chinese leadership as Chinese officials or Chinese leaders. I'm going to refer to them what I think is more appropriate and justified in light of what happened in Tiananmen Square, in light of what's happened historically in Tibet, in light of what has happened with the one-child policy, as really the butchers of Beijing. And I would refer to a couple incidents. For example, when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, in her inaugural trip to Asia, when she met with some of the butchers of Beijing, and she stated, quote, "It might be better to agree to disagree on human rights," as a perfect example of what you spoke of in terms of appeasement to tyrants and why that type of appeasement doesn't work. It seems that perhaps with this administration, it's been more important to worry about our debt obligations to the butchers of Beijing than speak out against continued widespread human rights abuses. I know at a private dinner in January, I doubt very much whether President Obama, when he met with the chief butcher of Beijing, Hu Jintao, whether he raised any of these important issues, or Vice President Biden in his August trip to China, where he met with several of the butchers of Beijing, focused more on the U.S. debt problem than he did on human rights issues. I think what we need to do is make sure and put the focus where it should be on many of the issues that you've raised, and in particular, I'd like to ask a question regarding some of the activities of the butchers of Beijing with respect to Tibet, and to Mr. Searing specifically. There has been unrest which has increased since 2008 in Tibetan ethnic areas under Beijing's administration, which have taken a new tragic turn in the past year with the practice of self-immolation. Last week, a monk reportedly became the 10th person this year to set himself on fire in protest of the Chinese occupation. 9 other Tibetans in their late teens and 20s, including 5 monks, 3 former monks, and a nun, have self-immolated since March, with 5 or more of them dying from their injuries. The Miami Herald reported on November 1st that, quote, "The response so far by the Chinese Communist Party, the butchers of Beijing, has been to knuckle down even more," end quote. Towns in the area are reportedly full of police. Internet access is shut off in many areas. Those suspected of sympathizing closely with activist monks are said to have disappeared. These protests seem directly connected to the suppression taking place at nearby Kirti Monastery, where 300 monks were taken away earlier this year for re-education and disappeared. Is this the case, and what do you know about this?
Congressman, that certainly is the case, and as before you arrived here, we learned that today yet another Tibetan had committed self-immolation and died as a result. I think there's no doubt that all these are taking place because of the repressive policies of the Chinese government in all Tibetan areas. And it's particularly so that in recent years, the Chinese policies have been restricting or even further limiting the small freedom that Tibetan people had, space they had to express themselves, their identity, their religion, their culture. And initially in past, maybe more than before 10 years or so, some areas like the areas where Kirti Monastery or Ngapa areas had relatively more flexible policy than the Tibet Autonomous Region, which the Chinese call Tibet. But now the Chinese government has sort of blanketly imposed restrictions all over Tibetan areas, even in non-political matters, so much so that they affect the very living of the Tibetan people. And when people are forced to choose means like self-immolation, it shows that it's a desperate situation.
Well, to continue that, with respect to relocation, there are indications that the protests broke out as a result of Chinese policy decisions designed to displace ethnic Tibetans in the area with Han Chinese settlers. Is this also an issue?
I cannot say that we have evidence to say this is the policy, but what is happening in Tibetan areas today is more and more non-Tibetans, particularly Han Chinese, are coming in, and which in a way marginalizes the Tibetan society. And since Tibetan, the very identity of the Tibetan people is linked with our culture, our religion, when these freedoms are being curtailed on the one hand. On the other hand, there are other players, so to say, in the society in which they live. It creates conflicting situation, and when the government doesn't pay attention to it, it results in such consequences.